30 years of silence bought me nothing but a seat at the far end of the table. Last Tuesday, over a dinner I paid for, my daughter called me an extra mouth to feed. She sees a frail widow taking up space in the guest room. She does not see the accountant who knows exactly how to read a contract. I did not get mad. I just went out and bought their building. My name is Marianne Holloway. I am 58 years old. Though my knees feel 70, and my patience feels like it is currently running on a severe deficit. To the world, and specifically to the two people currently occupying the living room of apartment 4B. I am just a quiet widow who drinks too much tea and watches too much cable news. They have conveniently forgotten that for 20 years I was the chief accountant for Sterling and Vance Logistics. I did not just count beans for a living. I made sure the beans did not disappear into the pockets of greedy vice presidents who thought they were smarter than the woman holding the red pen. My life at Ridgewell Heights is a study in invisibility. I wake up at 5 in the morning. I make my coffee strong, black, and silent. I ensure the kitchen is spotless before my daughter, Sarah, wakes up. It is a discipline I maintained even after Richard died. Lately, however, the air in the apartment has grown thick. It started with small comments, little jabs wrapped in fake concern that landed like bruises. "Mum, do you really need the heating on that high?" Sarah asked last week, shivering in a sweater that cost $200. The bill is getting... well, it is getting intense. It is 68 degrees. "Sarah," I replied, not looking up from my book. "Right, but..." "Inflation. You know, every dollar counts. They think they are carrying me. That is the joke. When Richard got sick, the medical bills were enough to drown us. I liquidated my retirement accounts quietly. I managed the debts. I balanced the ledger of this family while they slept soundly, dreaming of vacations they could not afford. This apartment, this prestigious address at Ridgewell Heights, was only possible because I signed the guarantor checks 3 years ago. They seem to have selective memory regarding whose credit score secured the lease when Mark was still driving for a rideshare app and looking for himself. The shift happened 2 nights ago. We were eating pasta, cheap pasta. The sauce was jarred, acidic, and thin. Mark, my son-in-law, kept tapping his fork against the side of his plate. It was a nervous tic he developed whenever he wanted to ask for money or hide a mistake. The landlord called. Mark said, not looking at me, "Rent is going up, another 5%. I did the math instantly in my head. That is manageable. I can adjust my contribution. I have some dividends clearing next week. Sarah put her fork down. It clattered loud enough to make the water in the glasses tremble. It is not just the rent. Mom, it is everything. Food, utilities, medical co-pays. I pay for my own prescriptions. Sarah, I said, keeping my voice level. It is the total impact. Marianne, Mark said. He calls me Marianne when he is trying to be authoritative, which usually means he is terrified. We are looking at the budget and the numbers just do not work. We are bleeding out here. So what are you saying? I asked. Sarah looked at me, her eyes devoid of the warmth a daughter should have. She looked tired. Yes. But underneath the fatigue was a cold calculation that I recognized. It was the look of a manager deciding which employee to lay off to save the quarter. We are saying that in this economy, having an extra mouth to feed is a luxury we maybe cannot afford right now, Sarah said. Not if we want to save for a house of our own one day. We need space. Mum, we need to cut costs. The words hung there. Extra mouth. I looked at the half-eaten pasta. I looked at the woman I birthed and the man she married. They were looking at me not as a mother, not as the woman who paid for the wedding, but as a liability on a balance sheet, a non-performing asset. They did not know I had been awake for 3 nights, analyzing the building's management restructuring. They did not know I still had contacts at the bank who owed me favors. I wiped my mouth with the paper napkin. "I see," I said softly. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply started closing the account in my heart. They wanted to talk about economics, fine. I would teach them a lesson in supply and demand. The discussion about the electric bill did not stay about electricity for long. By Wednesday evening, it had mutated into a full audit of my existence. I sat at the kitchen island, hands folded on the granite countertop I had paid to install 4 years ago, while my daughter paced the floorboards. She held a spreadsheet printout like a weapon. "It is simple arithmetic." "Mom," Sarah said, her voice rising an octave. "We are 3 adults in a 2-bedroom space. The rent is going up to $3,200. Mark and I, we are drowning. We cannot carry a third person who is on a fixed income. I contribute $1,200 a month." "Sarah," I reminded her, my voice steady despite the thumping in my chest. "That is nearly 40% of the rent. But you eat here." Sarah slammed the paper down. "You use the water. You use the internet. You are here all day while we work. The utility spike is entirely you. We did the math. If we downsized, or if you found a place that caters to people your age, state-assisted housing maybe." I looked at Mark. He was standing by the refrigerator, intently studying the magnets. This was the boy I had bailed out of a credit card lawsuit 6 years ago. I had paid the lawyer $5,000 in cash so Sarah would not know how deep his gambling debt went. "Mark," I asked, "do you agree with this?" He did not turn around. He shrugged, a small, tall, pathetic movement of his shoulders. "Sarah has a point. Marianne, we just need room to breathe. It is nothing personal." "Nothing personal," I repeated. "You are evicting me." "We are not evicting you," Sarah snapped. "We are just saying that by next Monday, the 1st of the month, we need the room back. We are going to turn it into a home office. Mark needs it for his freelance work." "Next Monday," I said. "That is 5 days away." "You are resourceful," Sarah said, though she could not meet my eyes. "You always say you can handle anything. So, handle it." The next 4 days were a blur of indignity. I watched my own child pack my life into black trash bags. They did not even buy boxes. My winter coats, my books, the framed photograph of Richard. Everything was shoved into plastic sacks usually reserved for garbage. When a porcelain figurine that Richard gave me for our 10th anniversary fell off the dresser and shattered, Sarah did not apologize. She just swept the shards into the dustpan and dumped them in the bin. It was old anyway. She muttered. I sat in the corner of the room, silent. I let them believe I was defeated. I let them believe the silence was shock rather than calculation. Every time Mark walked past me, he flinched, as if he expected me to scream about the money I lent him. I said nothing. I wanted him to feel comfortable. I wanted them both to feel entirely safe in their cruelty. On the final evening, the hallway was quiet. I dragged my 2 suitcases and 3 trash bags to the door. The neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Gable, opened her door to put out her recycling. She saw me standing there with my life in bags. She saw Sarah standing behind me, arms crossed, checking her watch. Mrs. Gable knew exactly what was happening. She looked at me, then looked down at her shoes, and quickly closed her door. The lock clicked shut. I was a contagion they did not want to catch. "Do you need money for a cab?" Sarah asked. It was a token gesture, intended to soothe her own guilt rather than help me. "No," I said. "Where will you go away?" I replied. I walked out into the cool evening air of Ridgewell Heights. The streetlights were just flickering on. I did not look back at the window where I knew they were already high-fiving or pouring wine to celebrate their newfound freedom. I signaled a taxi, and the driver, a tired man in his 60s, loaded my bags. I kept one item separate from the luggage. It was a battered brown leather accordion file that I held tight against my chest. Sarah and Mark thought it contained old recipes, or maybe sentimental letters. They had never bothered to look inside. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I opened the flap of the folder. Inside lay the original deed of trust for the land Ridgewell Heights was built on, a document linking back to a holding company I had formed in 1995. Next to it was a letter from Northline Assets, confirming the impending sale of the building due to the current landlord's bankruptcy. "Where to?" Lady the driver asked. "Old Harbour Flats," I said. "And take the long way. I have some reading to do." The room at Old Harbour Flats smelled of mildew and cheap lemon cleaner, but the internet connection was secure, and that was all that mattered. I set up my command center on a folding card table that wobbled every time I typed. To my left sat a pot of black tea, steeping until it was bitter. To my right lay the financial anatomy of the Ridgewell Heights complex. My family assumed I was senile, or at least financially illiterate. They forgot that for 3 decades. I was the one who structured their tax returns. I knew where the bodies were buried because I had dug the holes. Years ago, when Richard and I first co-signed for Sarah's college loans, I had insisted on a secondary signing right clause on all future family trust documents. It was a technicality, a safety net I never thought I would need to pull. But as I reviewed the digital filings on my laptop, I saw something interesting in the property history of the building my daughter was currently kicking me out of. The current landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson, was overextended. The public records showed liens against the property, but the real gold was a notice of default from a creditor called Northline Assets. They were preparing to foreclose. The building was not just a home. It was a distressed asset, bleeding cash. Henderson needed a quick, quiet sale to avoid bankruptcy court. I picked up my burner phone. I did not use my personal cell, as I did not want Sarah seeing the call log if she ever decided to check up on me. I dialed a number I had not called in 6 years. "Kincaid." A gruff voice answered. "It is Marianne," I said. "I need a proxy." We met 3 hours later at a diner called the Split Rail. It was noisy, greasy, and perfect for a conversation that officially did not exist. Arthur Kincaid was a broker who operated in the grey zones of commercial real estate. He looked at the file I slid across the Formica table. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the numbers with the hunger of a shark smelling blood in the water. "Northline Assets," Kincaid muttered, tapping the paper. "They are sharks, Marianne. If Henderson is in bed with them, he is desperate. But this price point, it is steep. 2.4 million for the deed and the liabilities. I know the valuation." "Arthur," I said, sipping my lukewarm water. "I also know Henderson needs to liquidate before the 1st of the month to save his other holdings in Jersey. Offer him 2 million flat. Cash closing. 7 days." Kincaid looked up, his eyebrows arching over the rim of his glasses. 2 million. In liquid cash, Marianne. I know you were good at Sterling and Vance, but that is a heavy lift for a retiree. Do not worry about the liquidity, I said coldly. Just draft the offer. The buyer is a limited liability company called Blue Ledger Holdings. My name appears nowhere. And the source of funds, Kincaid asked, lowering his voice, leaning in over his coffee. Diverted bonuses, I said, staring him down. From 1998 to 2010, Richard never asked about the executive profit-sharing checks. I invested them. Aggressively. The compound interest over 20 years is substantial. Kincaid whistled low and long. He tapped the folder. Does the family know the daughter? They think I am destitute, I replied. They think I am currently looking for a bed in a state shelter. So this is revenge, Kincaid said, a smirk touching his lips. You are buying the roof over their heads to squeeze them. I shook my head. I looked out the window at the grey street. Revenge was messy. Revenge was emotional. This was something else entirely. This was a correction of the natural order. No, Arthur, I said. Revenge is for children. This is control. When you own the asset, you dictate the terms. They wanted to talk about economics? Fine. I am becoming the economy. I will make the call, Kincaid said, closing the folder and sliding it into his briefcase. If Henderson bites, you will own the building by Friday. He will bite, I said, standing up and smoothing my coat. He is drowning, and I am the only lifeboat in the harbour. I walked out into the rain. I had spent a lifetime being the soft, supportive cushion for everyone else to land on. Now, I was the concrete foundation, and concrete does not yield. The closing for Ridgewell Court took place on a rainy Thursday morning in a windowless conference room downtown. There was no champagne. There were no handshakes or sentimental speeches about the legacy of the building. It was simply a transfer of assets, a migration of columns on a spreadsheet. I sat across from Henderson, the former landlord. He looked tired, his suit slightly rumpled, his eyes darting to the clock on the wall every 30 seconds. He did not recognize me. To him, I was just the authorized signatory for a nameless investment vehicle. You are saving my neck, Henderson said, sliding the final stack of documents across the mahogany table. The maintenance costs alone were killing me. The tenants? Well, they are a mixed bag. Some pay on time. Some need constant reminders. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name not as Marianne Holloway, but as the managing director of Blue Ledger Holdings. The ink looked black and permanent against the white paper. We are aware of the tenant profile, I said, keeping my voice professional and flat. Blue Ledger has done its due diligence. Arthur Kincaid sat next to me, silent as a grave, organizing the cashier's checks. He handed over the funds $2 million exactly, and just like that, the building where my daughter slept belonged to me. The walls, the plumbing, the roof, and the very floorboards under her feet were now my property. Do you want to initiate lease renegotiations immediately? Kincaid asked once we were outside, standing under the awning of the title company. We can legally issue 30-day notices for rate adjustments starting tomorrow. No, I said, watching the traffic splash through the puddles. Not yet. Send a standard notification of ownership change. Keep the rent exactly the same. Keep the terms identical. I want them to feel safe. I want them to think that nothing has changed, except the address where they mail the check. I moved into my new apartment later that afternoon. It was not in a prestigious neighborhood. It was a studio apartment above a bakery, 3 blocks from the library. It was small, barely 400 square feet. But the air inside tasted sweet. It tasted of autonomy. I unpacked my 2 suitcases. I placed my books on the shelf. I made a cup of tea and set it on the small table. For the first time in 10 years, I did not have to worry about the clink of the spoon against the porcelain disturbing anyone. Then the phone began to buzz. It started subtly. My daughter, Sarah, called on Saturday morning. I let it go to voicemail. I sat in my armchair and listened to the recording as it played. "Mum, it is Sarah," her voice said, sounding tinny through the speaker. I just wanted to check in. See where you landed? We were worried. Also, look, the internet bill just auto-paid and it overdrew the joint account. I thought you said you handled that before you left. Call me back. I did not call back. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank portal for Blue Ledger Holdings to verify that the rent checks for Ridgewell Court had been processed. 2 days later, the tone shifted. Sarah called again in the evening, this time. There was an edge to her voice, a mix of annoyance and rising panic. "Marianne, pick up." Sarah said to the voicemail, "This is ridiculous. We are trying to budget here and, well, without your share of the groceries, things are tight this week. Mark needs new tires for the car. We just need to know if you can, send over what you would have paid for the first week before you left. It is only fair." I listened to the message 3 times. I analysed her tone like I used to analyse quarterly variance reports. She was not asking for help. She was demanding restitution for a burden she had voluntarily cast off. She still believed I existed to subsidise her life. I saved the message in a folder named Evidence. I did not reply. I did not text. I simply made another cup of tea and watched the rain streak against the glass of my window. They were learning the first lesson of the real world. Silence is not empty. Silence is a wall. And right now, I was building it brick by brick. They were waiting for a mother to save them. They did not know they were now dealing with a landlord. 48 hours after I dragged my suitcases down the stairs, my daughter and her husband threw a party. It was not a large gathering, just the 2 of them. But the walls of apartment 4B are thin, and my source inside the building, Mrs. Gable, has excellent hearing. She told me they bought a bottle of Cabernet that cost $40. They ordered sushi. They toasted to their newfound space. While they were clinking glasses in the living room I had furnished, I was sitting in my cramped studio, watching the digital confirmation of the deed transfer load on my screen. The progress bar hit 100%. The property was mine. The next morning, Sarah began the erasure of my existence. She did not just clean my old room, she began to demolish it. Through the building's maintenance request portal, which now routed directly to my encrypted server, I received a notification. Tenant requests permission to paint secondary bedroom. The form read, "Color sage green." I sat at my small desk and stared at the request. They were asking their new, faceless landlord for permission to paint over the walls I had stared at during my sleepless nights. I moved my mouse and clicked Approve. I wanted them to invest. I wanted them to spend money on paint and brushes. I wanted them to feel settled. By Wednesday, the atmosphere in 4B shifted. I had instructed my property management software to automatically generate and mail a formal notice of ownership change to every unit in the complex. It was a standard legal document, dry and devoid of personality, printed on heavy cream paper. Mrs. Gable texted me later that afternoon. They got the letter. Mark is pacing in the hallway. I could picture the scene perfectly. Sarah would be holding the letter, her brow furrowed. Mark would be trying to Google the name of the new owner. Blue Ledger Holdings, I imagined Sarah saying. Who are they? What happened to Henderson? Back in my studio. My inbox pinged. It was an email from Mark's personal address. The subject line read, "Urgent question regarding lease standing." I opened it. The tone was a mix of professional posturing and underlying panic. To whom it may concern at Blue Ledger Holdings. The email began, "We are the tenants of Unit 4B. We received your notice today. We just wanted to reach out and establish contact. We have been loyal tenants for 3 years. We assume our current lease terms remain valid. We are currently doing some improvements to the unit at our own expense. Please acknowledge receipt." I leaned back in my chair. I could hear Mark's voice in the text, desperate to sound competent. He was terrified that a corporate owner would look at their credit score, which I knew was hovering in the low 600s, and decide they were a risk. I did not reply. 24 hours passed. Another email arrived. "Hello, we are just following up. We are a little concerned about the lack of communication. Please let us know if there are any changes we need to be aware of." I took a sip of my tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and comforting. I visualized them in that apartment. Sarah would be staring at the sage green paint swatches, wondering if she should return them. Mark would be checking his spam folder every 10 minutes. "Mark, stop refreshing the page." I could hear Sarah snapping in my head. If they wanted to kick us out, they would have said so. But silence is worse. "Sarah." Mark would reply, "Corporations are ruthless. If they do not answer, it means they are preparing something." He was right, of course. I let the email sit unread. I marked it with a red flag. I had scheduled the next automated email to go out in exactly 3 days. It would be a request for updated tenant information, asking for proof of income and employment verification. I knew Mark's freelance contract had just ended. I knew Sarah's hours at the clinic had been cut. I watched the rain fall outside my window. They wanted a life without me. They were getting it. They were getting the cold, hard reality of a world where no mother exists to smooth over the edges. I was not their mother anymore. I was Blue Ledger Holdings. And Blue Ledger Holdings did not care about their feelings. It only cared about the terms of the contract. The silence was not an oversight. It was the first turn of the screw. The management office of Ridgewell Court was a glass-walled fishbowl near the mailboxes. For years, I had walked past it, averting my eyes from the previous landlord, Mr. Henderson. Now, I sat behind his desk. I had replaced his cheap plastic chair with an ergonomic leather one I bought for $300. I was reviewing the fire safety inspection logs when the door flew open. Sarah marched in, her heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. She held a crumpled piece of paper, the ownership notice, in her hand. She did not look at the person in the chair immediately. She looked at the room, scanning for authority. "Excuse me?" she announced. Her voice pitched high with prepared indignation. "I have been emailing Blue Ledger Holdings for 3 days with no response. I need to speak to a manager. Right now." I slowly rotated the chair to face her. I rested my hands on the desk, clasping them over the ledger. The manager is present. Sarah, I said. My daughter froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She blinked. Once, twice, as if trying to clear a glitch in her vision. She took a half step back, her grip on the paper loosening. "Mum," she whispered. Then, her confusion hardened into annoyance. "Mum? What are you doing here? Did you break in? If Henderson finds you sitting in his chair, he's going to call the police. You cannot just wander back here because you are lonely. Mr. Henderson does not work here anymore," I said, my voice calm, stripping away the maternal warmth I had provided for 30 years. And I did not break in. I have the keys. I held up the master key ring. It jingled softly in the quiet office. Sarah stared at the keys. She looked at the nameplate I had just placed on the desk, M. Holloway, Managing Director. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and ghostly. "No," she stammered. "No, that is impossible. You are broke. You are living in a studio. You cannot be Blue Ledger." "I am Blue Ledger," I corrected her. "And you are late with your tenant verification form?" "You bought the building," Sarah screamed. The sound was sharp, tearing through the air. "You bought the building. We kicked you out because we were drowning. And you had millions. You were sitting on a fortune while we struggled." "I was sitting on my retirement," I replied, "and my savings, which I have now reinvested. This is not personal. Sarah, this is business. Business." She slammed her hand on the desk. "I am your daughter. You watched me panic about rent. You watched Mark take extra shifts. And you let us kick you out just to pull this stunt. This is sick. This is psychotic. It is capitalism," I said. "You wanted to discuss the economics of an extra mouth to feed. I simply adjusted my position in the market. Now, please lower your voice. You are disturbing the other tenants." The door opened again. Mark stumbled in, looking out of breath. He saw Sarah's red face. Then he saw me. He did not look angry. He looked terrified. He looked like a man who realized the person he had treated like furniture was actually the one holding the chainsaw. "Marianne," Mark said, his voice cracking. Sarah said, "Is it true?" "It is true." Sarah spat, tears welling in her eyes. "She owns it. She owns all of it. She lied to us for years." Mark licked his lips. He took a step toward the desk, a nervous smile plastering itself onto his face. It was the smile of a salesman trying to close a deal he had already lost. Okay, let's all take a breath," Mark said, holding up his hands. "Marianne, look, this is crazy. But it is actually great news. Right. It stays in the family. We can work this out. Since you are the owner, obviously the rent situation is, well, we can dissolve the lease. Right. Just make it a family arrangement." I opened the file in front of me. I pulled out a copy of their current lease agreement. "Refer to Clause 4, Paragraph 2 regarding lease termination," I said, not looking up. "The lease is a binding legal contract. It remains in effect until the term expires in 8 months. But we are family," Mark pleaded. "Marianne, come on. You are not going to charge us rent." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sat silently while my daughter told me to leave. I looked at the man who had used my guest room for his storage while I slept on a sofa bed for a month when he first moved in. I am not charging you rent as your mother-in-law, I said. I am charging you rent as your landlord, and rent is due on the 1st. No exceptions. No partial payments. If you cannot pay, the eviction process begins on the 5th. Standard procedure? You hate us, Sarah whispered. You actually hate us. I do not hate you, I said, closing the file. I am simply treating you with the same professional detachment you showed me. Now, unless you have a maintenance request, I have work to do. Please close the door on your way out. The certified letters went out on a Tuesday morning. I spent $18.50 on postage to ensure that every tenant in Ridgewell Court received their notification with a signature requirement. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted proof of receipt. When the return receipt for Unit 4B landed on my desk, signed with a shaky scrawl by my daughter, I knew the clock had started ticking. The document inside was not an eviction notice. It was a notice of rent adjustment based on current market valuation. For years, Mr. Henderson had kept rents artificially low to avoid the hassle of finding new tenants. He was lazy. I am not lazy. I had hired an independent appraiser to assess the square footage, the amenities, and the proximity to the new transit hub. The report was 80 pages long. It concluded that the fair market value for a 2-bedroom unit in Ridgewell Heights was not $3,200. It was $9,600. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Sarah did not come to the office this time. She waited for me in the lobby, blocking my path to the elevator. She was holding the letter, her knuckles white. This is illegal, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. You cannot just triple the rent overnight. There are laws against price gouging. We will sue you. Mark is already on the phone with legal aid. I stopped and adjusted my handbag. I looked at the other tenants who were gathering by the mailboxes, clutching similar letters. They looked worried, but Sarah looked like a cornered animal. It is not overnight. Sarah, I said calmly. The notice provides 60 days before the new rate takes effect. That is double the statutory requirement. It is $9,600 a month, Sarah screamed, causing Mrs. Gable to flinch. Nobody can afford that. You are doing this to punish us. This is malicious prosecution or something. We will take you to court, and the judge will laugh you out of the room. You are welcome to try, I replied. But I suggest you read the addendum regarding the expiration of the municipal rent stabilization credits. They expired when the building changed hands. I am under no obligation to subsidize your housing. 2 days later, a letter arrived from a lawyer representing the Tenants Association, a group hastily formed by Mark in a desperate attempt to show leadership. They demanded a meeting. I agreed, provided it was held in my office with my legal counsel present. The meeting was brief. Their lawyer, a young man named Mr. Davis, who looked like he had not slept in a week, sat across from me. I placed a 3-inch binder on the desk. It contained the appraisal, the zoning laws, and 3 affidavits from real estate experts confirming the valuation. Mr. Davis, I said, sliding the binder toward him. Please review the comps on page 42. You will see that the building across the street is leasing for $10,000. Mr. Davis opened the binder. He read for 5 minutes. The room was silent, except for the humming of the air conditioner. Sarah and Mark watched him, waiting for him to unleash a devastating legal argument that would save them. Finally, Mr. Davis closed the binder. He looked at Mark. She is within her rights. Mr. Davis said quietly. The increase is aggressive, yes, but it is legal. The previous lease terms were significantly below market value. There is no cap on increases for this zoning district. But we cannot pay that, Mark stammered, his face turning red. That is 3 times our combined income. Then you cannot afford to live in Ridgewell Heights, I said. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. I opened my laptop. Here is the roadmap. You have 2 options. Option A is to sign the lease renewal at the new rate of $9,600. I will need a security deposit equal to 2 months of rent to secure the contract. Option B is to vacate the premises by the 1st of November. If you choose option B and leave the unit in pristine condition, I will return your original deposit within 30 days. You are enjoying this, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. You are actually enjoying watching us suffer. I am indifferent, I said, looking her in the eye. You told me I was an extra mouth to feed. You told me I was a financial burden. I simply removed the burden. Now you are facing the reality of the market without my subsidy. This is not suffering, Sarah. This is adulthood. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. The power in the room had shifted physically. I was no longer the old woman they could bully into the guest room. I was the institution. I was the signatory. I was the one who decided who stayed and who went. You have 72 hours to inform me of your decision, I said. If I do not hear from you, I will assume you are vacating, and I will list the unit on the open market. Good day. The 72-hour deadline evaporated like water on hot pavement. On the final morning, Sarah came to my office again. She did not march in this time. She shuffled. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy knot, and her eyes were swollen. She sat in the chair opposite me and did not look at the ledger. She looked at my hands. I am sorry, Sarah whispered. Her voice was brittle, threatening to shatter. I know I messed up. I know I was cruel. When we asked you to leave, I was so scared of the bills. I took it out on you. But you are my mother. You cannot do this to us. We have looked at other places. We cannot afford anything in this zip code. I listened to the hum of the computer fan. I looked at the woman who had once thrown my ceramic figurine into the trash without blinking. I am your landlord, Sarah, I replied comfortably. And you are a tenant who cannot meet the fiscal requirements of the lease. I am your daughter, she cried out, leaning forward. Does that mean nothing? Am admitting I was wrong? I am begging you. Mum? Please? Just let us stay. We will pay what we can. Do not throw us on the street. You did not throw me on the street, I corrected her. You threw me into a taxi with 2 bags. I am simply declining to renew a contract. The apology is noted. Sarah, but an apology is not currency. It does not balance the books. Mark entered the room then. He looked less emotional and more desperate, clutching a folder of his own. He sat next to Sarah and placed a hand on her knee. But his eyes were fixed on me with a calculating gleam that I found pathetic. Marianne. Listen. Mark started, trying to sound reasonable. We have been talking. If renting is off the table, let's talk equity. We can scrape together a down payment, sell us the unit. We can offer, say, $250,000. We take it off your hands, you get a lump sum, and we stay. It is a win-win. I stared at him. I did not blink. The market valuation of Unit 4B is $720,000. I said, "You are offering me 30 cents on the dollar. That is not a sale. That is charity. And as I recall, you were the one who said you needed to cut costs by eliminating extra mouths to feed. I am merely applying your logic to my asset portfolio. A unit sold at a loss is a liability." "So that is it?" Mark snapped, his facade crumbling. "You are just going to ruin us to prove a point. I am not ruining you," I said, standing up to signal the end of the negotiation. "I am letting you experience the consequences of your financial planning. You wanted independence? You have it." The move out happened on a Sunday. It was raining, a grey drizzle that soaked the cardboard boxes they carried out to the rental truck. I did not hide. I stood in the lobby, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, holding a clipboard. I was there to conduct the final walk-through inspection. Sarah walked past me carrying a lamp. She stopped for a second. She looked at me with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak that would have devastated the woman I used to be. But the woman I was now simply checked a box on the inventory sheet. "I hope it was worth it," Sarah said. "I hope the money keeps you warm." "It does," I said. "It bought the heating system you are currently standing under." She walked out the door and did not look back. Mark followed, struggling with the sofa. He did not look at me at all. The silence in the lobby was heavy, filled only with the squeak of their shoes on the wet tile and the thud of the truck gate slamming shut. I watched through the glass doors as the truck pulled away. It turned the corner onto 4th Street and disappeared into the traffic. I waited for the grief to hit me. I waited for the guilt to buckle my knees. I felt nothing. My heart did not ache. My pulse did not race. I felt the cool, clean sensation of a ledger that had finally, after 30 years, balanced out to zero. I turned around and walked back to the elevator. I had a unit to prep for the next tenant. The gossip moved through the corridors of Ridgewell Court faster than the drafts in winter used to. Within a week of Sarah and Mark driving their rental truck away, every resident knew the story. I could feel their eyes on my back when I walked through the lobby to collect the mail. I was no longer the invisible widow who held the door open. I was the terrifying landlady who had evicted her own flesh and blood. Mrs. Gable caught me by the recycling bins on a Thursday evening. She was clutching a bag of empty cat food cans. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, the way one looks at a car crash. "People are talking. Marianne," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They say you put them out on the street without a dime. They say it is unnatural." I placed a stack of flattened cardboard into the blue bin. I dusted my hands off, ensuring no dirt remained on my blazer. The lease expired. "Mrs. Gable," I said, and they were given the same option to renew as everyone else. If people are talking, perhaps they should spend less time gossiping and more time reading the terms of their own contracts. Clause 7 is particularly interesting regarding noise violations. Mrs. Gable stepped back, clutching her bag to her chest. You have changed. You used to be so sweet. I used to be a doormat." I replied, "Now I am the owner? If you have a maintenance issue, please use the online portal." I did not care about their judgment. Respect and fear are often the same currency in the business world, and for the first time in my life, I was rich in both. I established a new order. I fired the lazy superintendent Henderson had employed and hired a professional management firm that reported directly to me. We installed security cameras. We repainted the hallways a crisp, neutral white. The smell of stale cooking and damp carpet vanished, replaced by the scent of industrial cleaner. The building became quiet. It became efficient. The tenants who could not afford the market adjustments moved out, replaced by young professionals who paid their rent via direct deposit on the first of the month without complaint. There were no more late-night parties. There were no more arguments in the hallway about borrowed money. Ridgewell Court was no longer a community of neighbours. It was a portfolio of performing assets. My daughter and her husband vanished into the sprawl of the city. I heard a rumour from the mail carrier that they had moved to a basement apartment in a suburb 40 minutes south, a place where the train does not run and the schools are average. I did not verify the information. I did not look them up on social media. I simply archived their tenant file in a box marked closed accounts and placed it on the bottom shelf of the storage closet. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit in my office with the lights off, watching the streetlights reflect on the wet pavement outside. I thought about the silence in the past. Silence in my life meant I was being ignored. It meant I was waiting for someone to ask me for something. Now, the silence was heavy and expensive. It was the sound of total control. I walked past Unit 4B a month after they left. The door was freshly painted. A new couple lived there now. 2 architects who wore expensive glasses and never cooked at home. They did not know that the woman inspecting the fire extinguishers used to cry in the guest room. They just nodded politely at me. "Good evening, Ms. Holloway," the husband said. "Good evening," I replied. I realized then that there was no joy in this victory. There was no surge of dopamine, no vindictive thrill that movies promise you. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of balance. I had traded warmth for security. I had traded family for equity. I went back to my own apartment, brewed a pot of tea, and sat by the window. I was entirely alone. No one was coming to dinner. No one was going to call to ask how my day was. But as I looked around the room, I realized that for the first time, everything I saw belonged to me. The chair, the rug, the view, and the silence. It was a lonely kingdom. Yes, but it was mine, and I would never be an extra mouth to feed ever again. 6 months after the purge at Ridgewell Court, I sat in a conference room that smelled of expensive leather and floor wax. Across from me sat the representatives of Clearhaven Trust. They were young men in sharp suits who looked at my building not as a home, but as a high-yield asset. They were right. Under my management, the valuation had soared. "The terms are standard, Ms. Holloway," the lead partner said, sliding a heavy document across the mahogany table. "We acquire 60% of the equity. You retain 40% and a seat on the board. But day-to-day operations transfer to us. The wire transfer of $4.2 million will clear by noon." I picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc I had bought for myself as a birthday present, treating myself in a way I never would have dared a year ago. I did not hesitate. I signed my name with a flourish. With that ink, I ceased to be a landlord. I became a ghost. I did not stay to celebrate with the executives. I walked out of the high-rise and got into my car. My phone buzzed in my purse just as I turned the ignition. I glanced at the screen. It was Sarah. It was the 3rd time she had called this month. I knew why she was calling. The holidays were approaching. Guilt does strange things to people when the calendar turns. They start thinking about forgiveness. They start rewriting history to make themselves the victims who are big enough to extend an olive branch. I did not decline the call. I simply let it ring until it went to voicemail. I imagined her in that basement apartment, listening to the silence on the other end, realizing finally that the line had been cut permanently. I drove north. I had bought a small cottage on the coast of Maine, far away from the noise of the city and the memories of a life spent serving others. It was a place of grey skies and crashing waves, cold and cleansing. That evening, I stood before the stone fireplace in my new living room. The fire was roaring, hungry and bright. On the table next to me was a box I had carried with me for years. It contained the old tax returns, the birthday cards signed with hasty scrawls, the receipts for loans I knew would never be repaid. I picked up a photo of the three of us from a Christmas 10 years ago. We looked happy, but I looked closely at my own eyes in the picture. I looked tired. I looked used. Goodbye. I whispered to the woman in the photo. I tossed the photo into the fire. The edges curled, the image bubbling and blackening before disappearing into ash. I fed the rest of the papers to the flames one by one. The deed to the old house, the records of Mark's debts, the letters where Sarah asked for money. People call this revenge. They think I acted out of spite because my feelings were hurt. They are wrong. Revenge is messy and emotional. What I did was an accounting correction. I balanced the books. For 30 years, I was in the red, giving more than I received. Now, as I watched the last of the papers turn to smoke, I was finally in the black. I walked out onto the deck. The wind was biting, smelling of salt and freedom. I had millions in the bank. I had a home that was mine alone. I had no one to cook for, no one to clean up after, and no one to disappoint. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in shades of violet and steel. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air. I was not lonely. I was solvent. And for the first time in my life, the only person I had to answer to was Marianne Holloway. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I'm really curious to know where you folks are tuning in from. So drop a comment down below and represent your city or country. If you enjoyed Marianne's journey, please make sure to subscribe to Nora Revenge Stories. Smash that like button. And if you really want to help us grow, hit that hype button so more people can hear these stories. Catch you in the next one.